So almost 2/3 of us are going to need an extended period of chronic illness care. And this is where it really gets expensive. You're only getting about 90 days of coverage from your Medicare in retirement. That means that the bill is on you until you run out of money, and Medicaid, the program for the poor, steps in. What do we do in that gap to make sure you're not bankrupted? Hi, folks. This is Colin Richards again, and I'm excited to be continuing in this segment our series on financial independence through the Lord and Richards Roadmap. And in this little part of the series, we're talking about the challenges of chronic illness and healthcare, the kind of problems healthcare-wise that aren't paid for by your normal insurance. And they're not paid for Medicaid until you are completely out of money. There's a little bit that Medicaid will allow you to keep, but once you get past that, you're pretty much going to have to pay for everything until you get down to those levels. And so we have this gap that's created, and it is the number one reason why retirees go bankrupt. So in our last segment, if you didn't check that out, make sure you click there. We talked about some of the challenges of living longer. And as I think about it, I've heard this often, and I want to just repeat it to you in case you haven't. There really are three broad phases of retirement. And this is where healthcare and chronic illness kind of meets reality. A lot of folks who get retired, especially if you can retire a little bit early and afford it, live what we call the go-go years, especially in the 60s, right? You're spending 100% of your pre-retirement budget. Once you get into your 70s, one of the spouses often will start to slow down a little bit. And it's a little harder to get out and do the things that you really used to enjoy, your hobbies, travel, and so forth. So we call these the slow-go years, the slow-go years. And during those years, we can budget as part of your Lord and Richards roadmap a little bit less money going out, right? You may not be doing such big trips or a lot of travel. But once we hit our 80s, we're going to crank that budget back up because in these years, a lot of times we've got at least one spouse in a married couple who just won't go. And that's a lot of time because of the high cost of healthcare and the disability that creates. So the won't go years, a lot of times 80 plus into your 90s. And we take that budget right back up to 100% due to the high cost of healthcare. So go years, spending like you just like you stole it. Slow go years, those years when maybe one or both spouses just aren't able to get around quite as quickly, spending a little bit less, and then back up on that budget in the won't go years, 80 plus typically. Now, everybody's going to break this paradigm, right? A lot of you are going to live to 100 and be climbing mountains, but these are broad stages and we should plan for them in advance. Well, as we plan, we need to add in the cost of what if one of us becomes disabled? What if one of us needs chronic illness care? And the likelihood of that with a couple is about 70% on average. Ladies have a little bit higher likelihood, men just a little bit lower, but about 70% likelihood of needing assistance with two or more activities of daily living. Wow, that means most of us, most of those of you who are listening to me right now, one day are going to need additional help getting around, and that's not covered by your traditional insurance. The likelihood of needing 3 or more years of that, which, by the way, I'm going to talk to you about how expensive that is 62%. Again, a little bit higher, for one spouse or the other, but as a couple, about 62%. So almost 2/3 of us are going to need an extended period of chronic illness care. And this is where it really gets expensive. You say, how expensive, Colin? Well, running about $116,000 to $120,000 a year if you actually need skilled nursing. That is, you've got people taking care of you in what we used to call a nursing home. It's really a skilled nursing facility. Some folks are able to go in for just a little season and come right back out. They get some therapy. Maybe they're able to recover from an accident, a stroke, some type of debilitating fall. But a lot of us are going to need that kind of care ongoing. And you're only getting about 90 days of coverage from your Medicare in retirement. That means that the bill is on you until you run out of money, and Medicaid, the program for the poor, steps in. What do we do in that gap to make sure you're not bankrupted? Well, I want to start, before I talk about specific healthcare solutions, I want to start with kind of debunking some common myths. People say, well, I'll just self-insure. I'll just pay for it out of my pocket. That may be possible. And one of the things we do as part of your Lord and Richards roadmap process is to determine, do you have the assets available to you to do this and not be bankrupt? To do this and not leave behind a well spouse who is not able to afford the normal expenses of life, much less the chronic illness costs. And what happens is a typical couple without this kind of analysis and planning will, and this applies for singles as well, will start withdrawing assets from their normal portfolio. And most people need those assets for their normal expenses. But if you're blessed with more money than will cover your normal expenses, then you start withdrawing. But here's the problem. The way most people I talk to are invested, they don't really have the downside protection to make that a viable, feasible approach. What do you mean, Colin? Well, when you withdraw assets, whether it be for your living or for your care in a down market, and especially if that happens early in retirement, but it can happen anytime, it can ravage your portfolio. Somebody has coined the expression dollar cost ravaging, right? Not averaging. That's an investment approach that people use over time, but dollar cost ravaging. So the solution, first of all, in your normal portfolio, if you're going to self-insure, first of all, get an analysis done to see if you truly can afford the high cost of care. You say, well, what if I don't need skilled nursing? Is it going to cost me $120,000, $130,000 a year? If you're able to do that at home, the average cost is about half that, okay? So that's kind of our range, 60 to 120 or so thousand a year. And that, by the way, is going up substantially. You need to count on an inflation rate based on studies by Medicare, Medicaid, other entities of about 6% on your care. Wow, that is a big inflation rate. So on your investment portfolio, if you're going to go that route, and it may not be the best idea to withdraw money from your investment portfolio. I think there's better solutions, but make sure you've got things that aren't correlated, like don't have all your money in the S&P 500. And by the way, don't count on bonds as a safety net. They're absolutely not a sufficient safety net. We'll get into that more when we talk more in this series on investing, but get some defensive strategies in there. We use what we call institutional risk management at Lord & Richards. That is a strategy where we incorporate options and other sophisticated strategies typically only used by institutions, foundations, endowments, insurance companies, and we can employ that for you, institutional risk management. And then utilize some zero risk investment options in your portfolio. There are zero risk options that allow you to still get significant growth. There are certain types of annuities that are downside protected that allow you to participate when the market rises. There are other tools just like that. I've talked about that in previous segments, such as market-linked CDs. But the key is don't just go shopping for these, because the right combination, the right type, in correlation with the rest of your portfolio is critical. Let me give you one example that will underscore this. If you have the classic 60-40 portfolio, if you're just working with a typical brokerage firm, you're going to have that 60-40 or 40-60 even. If you average 7.2%, okay, this study was done by JP Morgan, by the way, you're going to do fine if somebody illustrates it like that, okay, 7.2, 7.2, 7.2 every single year, and you withdraw 5.2%, right? You do just fine. You never run out of money. But would it surprise you if we actually take a historic portfolio that averages 9.5% over time? That means some good years, some bad years, average it out. It would run out of money a decade earlier than the 7.2% flat portfolio because of withdrawals and down markets. So folks, we got to start there. We got to get our roadmap in place so that we've got the right investments so that if you are going to have to depend on those for your care, you do not run out of money before you run out of life. In our next segment, I'm going to share with you some powerful tools that we can put in place to supplement or even take the place of dollar cost ravaging. It just starts, though, with the planning process at Lord & Richards. It starts with meeting and getting to know an advisor who will walk you through this. It's no cost to you, and we would love to do it. It simply starts with a phone call.